Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we are going to take a look at the upcoming full moon in the sign of Sagittarius, which comes through tomorrow. So we're getting out ahead of this one just a little bit because I think that most people will appreciate having a little bit of space and time to consider the full moon rather than doing it tomorrow when it's like right on us. So hopefully this will give you some good things to think about. We're going to look at some of the bigger contextual factors in the sky around the full moon and then try to make some practical interpretations that will help us prepare for it tomorrow. So anyway, that's our goal for today. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want, you can find a transcript of my daily talks like today's on the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. Major promotion for the day. We are in enrollment season, so I've been promoting my courses. If you go to the courses tab, first year course starts on June 16th. Not too late to join. We also do have need-based tuition available. If you are someone who would like to take the program but need a little help because you're on a fixed income or limited income, you're experiencing some level of financial hardship or strain, use the tuition assistance button. You name your price within a sliding scale. We match you with the tuition plan per month that works with your budget. So that's available. The other thing is after today's program is over, you will find an informational video about our horary astrology course. You'll see me do a horary demo chart. And if you are someone who would like to come study horary, we begin also in the month of June, June 22nd. The course begins. You need to have a little background in traditional astrology if you want to take this one, but I explain all of that in the informational video. We do have need-based tuition assistance for that one as well. And then be sure to check out the live events tab. In June, I'm doing a talk on the 12th house. I'll be promoting that more closer to the time of our of the actual event. So on that note, let us now take a look at the full moon in the sign of Sagittarius, which will be here tomorrow. Let me just get it up. Oh, here it is. All right. All right, so here you can see the full moon in the sign of Sagittarius. I'm going to mention some important contextual factors, 5 different things that I think you ought to pay attention to if you are a student of astrology. And then if these like contextual factors or details don't make sense to you, don't worry. After the galaxy brain portion of today's talk, I'll be sort of giving you some very practical takeaways for the full moon. Number one feature of this full moon is that it is in the bound and domicile of Jupiter. It's a very Jupiterian full moon, super Jupiterian. It's also interesting. I'm going to jump around here a little bit. It's interesting that Jupiter as the ruler is conjoined with benefic Venus at the very end of Taurus. So you get this very lush full moon with this combination. That's something we're paying attention to for sure. The other thing that's interesting is that the sun, which is always forming in exact opposition with the moon at the time of full moons, is in the domicile and bound of Mercury. So we have the quintessential Jupiter-Mercury archetypal tension present at the time of this full moon. And that is important because Jupiter, in just a couple of days after this full moon, will enter Gemini, where it is in the sign of its exile. And we talked at length about that exile status of Jupiter in Gemini having to do with the archetypal tension between Jupiter and Mercury. So this full moon, while very Jupiterian and Jupiter and Venus are together in Taurus, that's kind of very lush feeling, but it's also a full moon that is starting to highlight the upcoming tension between Jupiter and Mercury that we're going to be dealing with for a whole year while Jupiter is in Gemini. Jumping around a little bit more, Mercury also has a lot of power in this full moon because everything is about to enter Mercury's sign, because the sun opposing the moon is in Mercury's sign and bound. And what's interesting is that right after the full moon, within hours, in fact, Venus will enter Gemini, and then Venus will form a mutual reception with Mercury, who is in Venus's sign, while Venus is in Mercury's sign. So we now have mutual reception forming between Venus and Mercury just hours after the full moon. That is also a really important detail that adds to the picture of the full moon, the importance of everything moving into Gemini, and this kind of nice harmony that exists between Venus and Mercury coming off the full moon. So all important little details that we'll try to grant some big interpretive value to here in a minute. Number 5 is that Jupiter culminating at the very end of Taurus, shifting into Gemini, is important also because Jupiter is in the bound of Mars. And if we watch what's going to happen, just as Jupiter is leaving Taurus, Mars will enter the 19th degree of Aries, which was the recent solar eclipse point. So Jupiter, as the ruler of the full moon, is also quietly, sort of sneakily related to a reactivation of the solar eclipse. So this full moon has a little eclipse energy behind it. That's the point. So now we've gone through these 5 contextual factors, and let's try to give this some actual interpretive value that is going to make sense practically. All right. Number 1 is that this full moon has a very lush Venus-Jupiter feeling behind it, which could mean that even though it's in a fire sign like Sagittarius, we often think about things like philosophy and the convictions that we have and the endurance that's required in life to live with conviction and faith through hard times, to persevere, to be strong-willed and strong-minded. Sagittarian qualities are really wonderful. But it's funny because this Sagittarius moon actually points us back to the very earthy, sensual Venus-Jupiter connection at the last degree of Taurus. So it's a fiery full moon, but it has this kind of lush, abundant, Venusian, sensual kind of bigness behind it. And so when I think of this combination, for example, an image that comes to my mind is the Renaissance Festival. I don't know if you guys have ever been to a Renaissance Festival. We try to go every year or two, and we bring the kids, and then we all get dressed up, and they get their faces painted, and I end up drinking mead somewhere. I have like a glass of mead or something. And at some point, there's always a thought like, should I buy a sword? I'm just playing. But you know what I mean? If you've ever been to a Renaissance festival, they're a lot of fun. There's this kind of like, they're very fiery. And you get the feeling like in this reenacted ancient medieval village, that you're in, that long ago, people's beliefs would have had them maybe killing each other in the streets, right? And it's very, there's a kind of like, there's like barbarians walking around, and then at the same time, there's this overflowing sense of like feminine, sensual enjoyment and pleasure. There's people singing. There's big boobs everywhere. People wearing those, what are they called? Corsets or whatever. And yeah, sorry to be a little graphic. And there's also like people drinking and eating, and there's all sorts of food that you definitely shouldn't eat, but you do, and it's fun. And there's color, and there's song and like that. So this full moon has a little bit of that feeling behind it. Is the word mirth? I feel like that's a word. Anyway, it's this kind of the cornucopia of life, as well as the kind of fierce. There's a kind of fierceness combined in the fieriness of the full moon in Sag, combined with this sort of sensual explosion of Venus Jupiter in the last degree of Taurus. Okay, so think about that. Think about that combination of energies in the sky that are coming through right now. See if you can notice that around you as the full moon expresses itself. All right, so the second thing to consider is the tension between Hermes and Zeus, or Jupiter Mercury. Remember, this full moon is in the bound and domicile of Jupiter, while the sun opposite the moon is in the bound and domicile of Mercury. Jupiter, in 2 days after the full moon, will move into Mercury's sign. Venus, within hours, will move into Mercury's sign in bound. And so what is the Jupiter-Mercury tension all about? In a sense, you could think about it as Jupiter likes to bring about a sense of coherence and order and wholeness and fulfillment, and it's lush, but it's cohesive. It's like I have a graduate degree and I understand a lot about a subject, whatever that might be. That's very Jupiterian. I've got a diploma. I've achieved a certification of some kind. I've gone through seminary and I've been ordained or something like that. It's very Jupiterian. So Jupiter in the next year is going to be doing all of the Jupiter things, building that coherence, growing things, very fertile, lush, expansive, but it's doing so in a sign that is very much about creative chaos, right? Gemini, as a Hermes ruled double-bodied air sign, is about ideas and people and the stimulation of like a bustling bohemian coffee shop. Or look out over a field and you see all the pollinators moving around. It looks kind of chaotic, but actually there is a bigger sense in which an order, some fertile process is taking place. But if you get lost in any of the particulars, it can feel sort of random. That's the tension that Jupiter in Gemini feels in a way over the next year, or is going to exhibit. And we've talked about this already in some of the previous videos I did on Jupiter and Gemini. The point is that this full moon is going to start introducing the idea that we're building towards something, but it's going to start coming in all sorts of busy, bustling, creative, and stimulated, sometimes overly stimulated ways that can sometimes feel chaotic. So we have to be ready to work through a process where coherence comes through maybe deconstruction. Coherence comes through processes that aren't always going to immediately make sense, or might go in one direction only to go in another direction, which is very much the nature of Hermes Mercury. So that's really important, is that this full moon is pointing toward this kind of rich, abundant energy. And then it's also starting to point us in the direction of a kind of, I just broadly, without any official meaning, have used the phrase chaotic and magical, chaos magic, but not like in a, not with respect to some official school of that kind of magic. I'm just broadly using the words together. So anyway, the other thing that's so interesting is that as Jupiter's culminating and switching signs at the end of Taurus, it's also in the bound of Mars. And right as before Jupiter switches into Gemini, Mars crosses the degree of the eclipse at 19 Aries, and then goes right into a conjunction with Chiron. So it's interesting because we have this full moon is very much reactivating the eclipse energy. So you could look at the connection in your chart if you wanted to get a little creative between the whole sign house of Sagittarius and the whole sign house of Aries, and the trine that they have to one another, because this full moon, in a roundabout way, through Jupiter having so much rulership over the full moon and Jupiter culminating in the bound of Mars at the very end of Taurus, with Mars going over the eclipse degree, it's sneaky, but it's there. It's that this full moon, through a little web weaving, through a subtle pattern in the sky right now, is actually reconnecting us to the eclipse experience in Aries. So very powerful Marsy expression behind it. I think it's interesting when you combine fire with earth, right? It's fire is so willful, and it says, I'm going to shape the world by means of my will. It will have to conform to the shape of my will. That's a very fiery kind of assertion. Well, it's so interesting that sort of connection between a fiery full moon and the Venus-Jupiter conjunction at the end of Taurus, along with the subtle reactivation of the eclipse in a fire sign, is all taking place. I keep getting the feeling that this relates back to Jupiter-Uranus conjoining in the end of April in Taurus. We're trying to impress something upon the earthy material of our life so that it will look a certain way, or feel a certain way, or create a certain kind of peace or quality of experience, usually in the name of pleasure, comfort, ease, security, stability. And there are some strong energies at work right now that are moving toward the continued development of those Jupiter-Uranus goals. The thing that's so interesting is that now everything is turning toward this state of air. And to me, that means that the changes that we're trying to enact are going to start coming through that, again, that kind of cross-pollinator energy, where it's just lots of people, ideas, stimulating thoughts and different directions all coming in simultaneously. Some of them will hit, some of them won't. It may feel a little chaotic, but over time, we're going to find that new ideas are shaping our reality in ways that go back to this desire for pleasure, for embodiment, and things like that. So, all right. Well, anyway, that's just sort of me riffing on some of the major themes of the full moon. I would love to hear from you guys and hear what you're noticing around this full moon and how any of these themes are showing up in your life. That is where I will leave it for today. After I sign off, if you want to stick around to hear more about the horary program, there's about a 10-minute informational video that I have tagged on after I sign off, so you can learn more about it if you would like to. Otherwise, enjoy this full moon in Sagittarius. We will be back tomorrow with more content as always. See you soon. Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around. I'm going to tell you guys more about the upcoming horary astrology program, which begins later in June. And I hope that if you have never learned anything about horary, that you will, at least in listening to this, be exposed to horary astrology, have a little bit of an understanding of what it is. And if not now, then maybe sometime in the future, you can take time to study it. It is one of the forms of astrology that dates back to the earliest eras of astrology, the Hellenistic era, the medieval era, the early Indian period of astrology. And it is a branch of astrology that is concerned with specific predictive questions. So, for example, a horary question is usually formed in terms of a yes or no answer, and it is cast from the location of the astrologer at the time that the astrologer receives the question. So, a typical horary question might be, will I get the job? Or will we get married? Or my cat went missing, will she come back? There are applications of horary astrology that involve the location of missing items, like where is my missing pen? Or where is I actually helped a farmer one time locate a missing bull that had gotten out of the pasture. So it's a very, really fascinating form of astrology. It's very old, and it is like the birth chart of a question, a predictive question. So again, if I receive a question from someone and it's like, will I get the job? Then I cast that chart at the time I get the question. I usually use the receipt of the email time. And then I cast a chart for that question. And there are a series of traditional techniques that have been around for a very long time, thousands of years, that are used to determine the answer to that question. So with that in mind, let me show you a chart and you can learn, see what it's like in real time. So this chart is, the question that was asked is, will my spouse keep his job? This is a woman who had some very good reason to worry that her spouse might be getting laid off. And so she wanted to know so she could prepare herself, is he in fact going to be laid off from his job? And so when I receive that question, that's a horary question. When I receive it at 9:03 a.m. on April 10th of 2023, a little over a year ago here in Minnetonka, Minnesota, where I live, I cast a chart that becomes the birth chart of that question. I then use a series of techniques, and that's what you're going to learn in the horary program, are those techniques that go into answering all different kinds of questions. Questions about jobs, questions about money, questions about health, questions about marriage or relationships, questions about babies, questions about in pregnancy. I mean, you name it. And even missing pets and people and missing items. You see a lot of different approaches in horary. And so over the course of a year, we study those approaches to different kinds of questions, and we practice and practice with different charts of different questions, learning the techniques so that we can have this predictive tool in our kit as an astrologer. So anyway, here's a question, will spouse keep his job? In horary, what happens is you are always looking at the planets that represent the people and aspects of the question. The person asking the question is called the querent. The querent is always given the ruler of the ascendant and usually the moon as a co-signifier of the querent. So in this case, Gemini is rising. So we're going to give Mercury to the querent and the moon. Well, we can see the moon is sitting right on the cusp of the 7th house of marriage, which shows us that the querent, the person asking the question, is indeed really concerned about their spouse. The placement of the moon gives that away because it's sitting on the cusp of the 7th, which is going to be the house of the partner. So you see little things like that. They're a little wink that you have you have a radical chart, so to speak. Now, the 7th house ruler is going to be the spouse. That's Jupiter, since Sagittarius sits on the 7th house cusp. In horary, we use quadrant-based houses because the theory was all developed through quadrant-based house systems, which is interesting. So this is the only place in my practice that I teach from and use a quadrant-based house system, not whole sign. Anyway, it's really fascinating to look at this chart because Jupiter is going to represent the spouse. So we can see Jupiter over here, about to be conjoined by the sun. Then we look at the spouse's job. And the spouse's job is going to be the 10th house from the spouse. The 10th house from the 7th is going to be the ruler of the 4th. That's called derived houses. This is something that appears in horary quite a bit. So if we take the spouse as house 1 and we count 1 through 10 from house 7, we get to the cusp of house 4 for the 10th from the 7th, or the spouse's job. That is the sun. So here we see that the sun, exalted sun in Aries, is about to conjoin Jupiter. This means that Jupiter is combust. And when Jupiter is combust like that so badly and the sun is about to conjoin it, that is a moment of death for Jupiter. So the job, we know that combustion from a planet like that is often implied in the charts of death, or that's a condition of debility for Jupiter at the hands of the exalted sun. And Jupiter is, of course, sitting on the 12th house cusp, which is the derived 6th from the 7th house of the spouse, a place that was associated with misfortune. So we can see that this is a very clear indication that that Jupiter is being debilitated by, burnt up by the job, and that moment that's coming of the conjunction could be positively looked at as maybe a death and rebirth of your career. But the first thing that's happening is the death. When it is a possibility built into the question that he could be one of the people that's about to be laid off at his company, and you have this kind of symbolism, this is very clearly a yes, your husband is about to be laid off because of that combustion and the upcoming combustion and conjunction from the sun. Now you might say, what about Cazimi? Doesn't the Cazimi mean like a rebirth? Yeah, but not first, right? The first thing that happens is that Jupiter is being burnt up by the sun. When the sun is the job and Jupiter is the spouse, and there is a possibility that this kind of event happens, then yes, that is exactly what happens. We can also see, if we take out the outer planets, which is something we toggle back and forth in our horary class, we take out the outer planets, and we can also see that the very next thing that is going to happen is the moon, as an indicator of the flow of events, is about to trine the sun and then immediately hit Jupiter, which means that the moon is also translating the light from the sun to Jupiter. And when the sun is acting here as a malefic burning Jupiter up, this is another sign that the flow of events is going to lead that malefic sun to eliminate Jupiter. The malefic sun only in this context because Jupiter is combust. So anyway, these are little rules of horary, and there's a ton of them, right? For every different kind of question, there are different ways of assigning planets to the parts of a question, and there are different techniques that we use to answer the question. In that case, the judgment of the chart was, it does look as though your husband is going to be laid off, and indeed, that was the outcome. Her husband was laid off within a week. So the way that I framed it in the answer was very uplifting, because I said, this is when we see this kind of event, a Jupiter Sun Cazimi, which we've had in the sky recently just now too, as I'm making this, that can be a sign of rebirth. So even if there's a death and a loss here of job, the opportunity for this to be a career reset is also implied by the transition of this Jupiter Sun conjunction. And she did write to me later in the summer last year to tell me that he found a new job. So, and it was indeed a positive reset. So half of the art of horary is delivering the news. How do you deliver a predictive result without increasing someone's anxiety, in a way that's constructive? How do we take what we see and translate it for someone when the question is predictive? And there's often a lot of, people have a lot of emotion invested in the outcome. So this is a beautiful form of astrology. If you are interested in studying it, here is how to register. You go over to the website, which is nightlightastrology.com, and you are going to go to the courses page. And when you're on the courses page, you're going to click on the horary course. You need to have a background in understanding dignities, aspects, and house meanings. And then it starts on June 22nd. At the bottom, you will find that there is need-based tuition assistance. And there are also payment plans that you can utilize, and a one-time payment saves a little bit of money. So, but if you need tuition assistance because it would be impossible for you to take the program otherwise, please be sure to check that out and come study horary. It's an amazing, amazing form of astrology. If I could do nothing but practice horary, I would, because it is so interesting to see the unique picture of each situation come to life in the context of a horary reading. There's no birth chart needed for it either. It's amazing that astrology can work that way. We always think, it has to work off from a birth chart. No. We can use astrology just like we use tarot cards. Cast them out at the moment a unique question comes up. Cast a chart at the moment of a question, and you have a series of techniques and approaches that can help you answer it. So that's horary in a nutshell. I hope to see you guys there, and thanks for listening.